Hello there. What are you doing up here in the attics, Millie? Have you been looking through this old suitcase? I see you've found one of the old photo albums that are stored up here. This photo album's full of photographs of the people that used to live in this house.
When do you think they used to live here? Do you think they lived here 5 years ago, when you were a baby mouse? Or do you think it was longer ago than that? What do you think, everyone? When do you think the people in these photographs lived here at Whitehall? Do you think it was 30 years ago, when your parents were young? Or do you think maybe it was more like 50 years ago, when your grandparents were young? Or maybe do you think they lived here even before your grandparents were born? Let's look at the photos to see if we can see some clues. The first thing to notice is that the photographs are black and white. What does that tell you? Let's look at the clothes they're wearing. Does anyone wear clothes like that today? Did they wear them when your parents were young, or your grandparents? What do you think? When would you think these photographs were taken? Tell the person next to you. That's right, Millie. These photographs are over 100 years old. The people in these photographs lived over 100 years ago. While we're up here, shall we have a look around? There are lots of different things to see up here in the Whitehall attics. We've got clothes and photographs, and we've got boots and hat boxes and glasses and clocks and suitcases. Do you know why there are so many different things up here in the attic? It's because people have been living here at Whitehall Historic House for over 500 years. Isn't that amazing? The first people to live in this house lived here around the year 1500. Now, you know what I think we should do next? I think we should find out who lived here in the past. Today we're going to be asking, in whose house is this mouse? We're going to put the people that lived at Whitehall in chronological order. This means that we're going to put them in order from who lived here first to who lived here most recently. We're going to use photographs to see what Whitehall used to be like in the past. And we're going to look at the sorts of objects that they would have used in the past. Now, I want you to imagine that this is a timeline of Whitehall Historic House. Here we have Millie. She lives here today. And to show that she lives here today, we're going to put her at this end of the timeline. As we go back along the rope, we're going to be going further and further back in time. We believe that Whitehall started life looking a bit like this. It was built around the year 1500. We believe that around about 300 people used to live in Cheam Village at this time. Cheam was well known for its sheep market, can you believe it, and its famous pottery. We also know that there was the church in the village called St Dunstan's. There was an inn, which is a bit like a pub, and across the road from that, there was a brewery that made its own beer. Would you have liked to live here at Whitehall when it looked like this? What if it was like this inside? When the house was built, the only heating would have come from one single fire. The floor would have been made from dirt or straw. What if I told you there was no glass in the windows when it was built? Would you have liked this to be your home? How do you think it would have felt living there? To show that the first people who lived here at Whitehall lived here around the year 1500, I'm going to put this poster up this end of the timeline. It shows that Whitehall's story began around the year 1500. Why don't you use a piece of rope and some pegs and put up a timeline in your own classroom? Now, let's go upstairs back to the attic to see what Millie's found. Hello, Millie. What have you found here? You've found the part of the attic that remembers George Aldrich. He lived here with his family in the 1640s. Let's see what's in this box. We've got some books, some candlesticks, some manuscripts. What have we got over here? We've got some candles and a cross and a Bible. What job do you think George Aldrich did? George Aldrich was the assistant curate at St Dunstan's Church. which is just across the road from Whitehall. This is a map from around 100 years after George lived at Whitehall. Can you see all of the shapes? They are all fields. This tells us that most of Cheam was farmland when George lived there. Cheam would have been a very small village then. By the time George Aldrich moved into Whitehall, it was a bit different from the Tudor farmhouse that I showed you before. Somewhere between the house being built in 1500 and 1645 when George moved in, one of the occupants had added a 3-storey extension onto the back of the house. This is where the staircase is today. George Aldrich wasn't just a curate at the local church. He was also a teacher. That's right. Now, in the 1600s, most children did not go to school. Can you imagine that? If you were a child living in Cheam Village in the 1600s, you probably wouldn't have gone to school either. You would have spent your time working in the fields with your parents and earning money. Doesn't that sound crazy? Now, George decided that it would be a good idea to set up a brand new school in Cheam so that the boys who lived here could have somewhere to learn. Hang on, did you just say boys? Yes, I did. Only boys were allowed to go to Cheam School. If you were a girl, you might not get taught how to read or write at all. And if you were taught, you'd either be taught by your parents, by your mother and father, or by a governess. Reverend George Aldrich started his school here, right here at Whitehall, and we believe that the first lessons were taught in this very building. By 1719, the school was so popular they had to build an entirely new building just around the corner, the other side of Cheam. Here we've got a picture of Cheam School from around about the year 1840. Does it look like your school? What's the same? What's different? This is a picture of the school from around 1840. The school stayed in this spot for 215 years. Here is a photograph of the school from 1903. Sadly, the school isn't there anymore. It moved to a big house in the country in the 1930s. This is the spot where it used to be. Do you recognise it? Let's put George Aldrich on our timeline. He lived here at Whitehall around the year 1645. So, where does he go on our timeline? Do you think he goes closer to 1500 when the house was built? Or do you think he's closer to today? Well, let me tell you. He lived here about 145 years after the house was built. So we're going to put him here on our timeline. Hello again, Millie. Now, we're back up in the attics now. Should we have a look around, see what other clues we can find about other people who lived here in the past? Has anybody spotted any clues? That's right. Did you spot the name Killick come up as we explored the attics? That's because the Killick family lived at Whitehall for a total of 222 years. The first member of the Killick family to live at Whitehall was John. He was married to a lady called Elizabeth, and they lived here with their 4 sons, James, John, Thomas and William Killick. This is around about the time that this map was made. Do you remember what all of these shapes were? That's right, they were fields. We believe that John was a farmer, but we don't know for sure. Now it's time to put our first Killick on the timeline. They're the family that lived here for over 200 years. Let's put James on first. He moved into the house in 1741. Where do you think he goes? Do you think he goes here, next to George Aldrich? Do you think he maybe goes a little bit further along? Maybe up near today? No, that's right. He comes after George Aldrich. Now, When John Killick died, he passed the house on to his son, James Killick. He took over the house in 1785. So he goes next. And then after him, his son, William, took over the house and he lived here with his family. So he goes next on the timeline. So far, 3 generations of the Killick family have lived at Whitehall. William Killick was married to a lady called Lucy, and together they lived here with their 8 children. Can you believe that? 8 children! Hang on, I think I can hear Millie squeaking. Shall we see what she's found?
Hello again, Millie. What have you found here? Let's see what this says. Can you read it? It says, Captain James Killick, born here 1816, commander of Challenger, sailor and businessman. Died Margate 1889. Let's find out some more about James Killick.
When James Killick was 16 years old, he became a sailor. He sailed all around the world on tea clippers, a bit like this one. Tea clippers were a very fast type of sailing ship which transported tea from China to Britain at very high speeds. After many years of really hard work, James Killick became the captain of his own ship. It was a ship called the Challenger, and it was a tea clipper. He became such an experienced tea clipper captain that they named him the China Bird. This is a painting of the Challenger. Now it's time to put Captain James Killick on our timeline. His father was William Killick, and he was born in 1816. So he's going to go here on our timeline. I wonder who lived here next. Let's go back up to the attics and see if Millie's found anyone else. No, sorry, don't pause it, I wonder who lived here next. Let's go back up to the attics and see if we can find out anything else about the Killick family. There you are, Millie. What are you doing up there? Well, actually, you found something that belongs to the next member of the Killick family to live at Whitehall. Shall we find out who they were? The next people to live at Whitehall were Harriet and Charlotte Killick. They'd lived here all of their lives, and they were the sisters of Captain James Killick. They took over the house in 1863. Now, Charlotte and Harriet Killick needed a way to make some money, and one of the ways they did this was they took in lodgers. Do you know what a lodger is? A lodger is somebody who might pay you to live in your house. We know this because we have a document called a census from the year 1881. Here is a small part of the census record. It's from the year 1881. This shows us that in 1881 they had a maid called Anne Baker, and they had 3 lodgers. Can you see what they're called or what their jobs were? It's very difficult to read, isn't it? If you look carefully, you can see that their names are Walter Damon, Montague Greenon, and John Tancock, and they were all teachers at Cheam School. Do you remember earlier on we were talking about the Reverend George Aldrich, who lived here in the 1640s? Do you remember that he was a reverend, but he also was the headmaster of Cheam School? He was the one who set up Cheam School in this very house. Now, 236 years later, when Charlotte and Harriet Killick were living here, there were 3 teachers from Cheam School living back here in the house. Isn't that a funny coincidence? Let's look at some photographs of Cheam School. These were taken about 20 years after these teachers worked there, but there are still lots of things that we can learn from them about what school used to be like. The census also tells us that Harriet Killick, the younger of the 2 sisters, was working as a governess. Now, what do you think a governess did? Tell the person next to you, what job do you think a governess did? That's right. A governess was a lady who was paid to teach children who didn't go to school. This was usually the girls in the family. The boys would have gone to school. To employ a governess to teach your children, you usually had to be quite rich. Being a governess was one of the few ways that someone like Harriet Killick could have earned her own money at this time. She worked as the governess to the two daughters of the headmaster at Cheam School. Hello, Millie. What have you found here? Let's take a look, shall we? This is unusual. What do you think it is? Well, I'll give you a clue. It's the sort of thing that Harriet Killick might have used in her lessons with the two little girls that she used to teach when she was their governess. What do you think it was for? Tell the person next to you. What do you think this is? I wonder what you thought. What did you think these were? What did you think they were used for? Well, let me tell you. I wonder if you got it right. This is a slate and a pencil. And in a Victorian classroom, these would have been used a bit like a pencil and paper, or a whiteboard and a whiteboard pen that you have in class today. This was the pencil, and children would have practiced their writing and their numbers on the slate. It makes a very faint drawing, doesn't it? Can you hear that sound? That would have been what a Victorian classroom would have sounded like. One of the really good things about a slate and a pencil was that when you made a mistake or when you'd finished your work, you could just rub it out. Amazingly, we actually have a photograph of Harriet Killick in the garden at Whitehall. It was taken around 30 years after she looked after the Reverend's children. It was taken around the year 1910. She was 86 years old at the time. Who do you think she is in the photo? Can you spot her? Well done. She's the elderly lady in the centre of the photograph. Who do you think's around her? That's right. She's surrounded by her family. The lady sitting down to her left is her niece, Penelope Muller. She lived at Whitehall in the early 1900s too. Let's put her on the washing line as well, shall we? Penelope Muller moved into the house in 1882, so she goes on our timeline next. Let's take a closer look at some of these people in the picture. We have a list of the people that lived at Whitehall in 1911. Here it is. Can you see? We have Harriet Killick in the middle, her niece Penelope Muller sitting next to her. Then we have somebody called Harriet Maud Muller and a lady called Susan Mary Muller. Hang on, 2 people called Harriet? That's a bit confusing. To save any confusion, they decided not to call themselves Harriet and Susan. These 2 ladies chose to use their middle names instead, and they called themselves Maud and Mary. How would you like to be called by your middle name? Why don't you tell the person next to you what your middle name is? Now we come to the last people to live at Whitehall. They were the sisters Maud and Mary Muller. They were the daughters of Penelope Muller. They moved into the house in the year 1900 and they lived here together for the next 50 years. So, now we know that Harriet Killick lived here. We know that Penelope Muller lived here. Maud Muller lived here. Mary Muller lived here. But hang on, 2 more people lived here too. Where are they in the photograph? Can you see their names? That's right, it says Anne Baker and Violet May Camkin. Can you see any clues to tell us who they were? That's right, they were servants. What sort of tasks do you think they would have done around the house? Tell the person next to you what you think. think? What did you think Violet and Anne would have spent their time doing? Did you say that they'd have done the cleaning? They'd have done all the washing of the clothes and the linens? They'd have done all the cooking? They'd have done all the washing up? They'd have had to set the fires and clean out the grates? They'd have been in charge of making the beds and changing the sheets? Did you think of any other jobs that I missed? Now it's time for you to get involved. Up here in the attics at Whitehall, we've discovered this suitcase. And inside it are lots of different sorts of objects that would have been here in the house around the year 1911, when Harriet, Penelope, Maud and Mary lived here. There are lots of very interesting things, and some very unusual things too. I wonder what they are. I wonder what this could be. I don't have anything like this in my house today, do you? What about this? This is a bit of a mystery object, isn't it? I wonder what that does. What about this? Feels smooth. Oh, and it's got a very strong smell. What about this? What could this have been for? This is very interesting too. It's very heavy. What do you think this would have done? There are lots of mystery objects in this suitcase. Your teacher has got photographs of all of these objects. They're going to give them out to you and you're going to ask some questions. You're going to ask, what is the object? What would it have been used for? And who in the household might have used it? Would it have been Maud and Mary, the young ladies? Would it have been Harriet and Penelope, the older ladies? Or would it have been the servants? What do you think? Well done, everybody. I wonder how many you knew. Now today we started off by asking the question, in whose house is this mouse? And we've found the answer, haven't we? You can sit there, Millie, while we have a look back through what we've learned. So first of all, we found that this house was built around the year 1500, but we don't know who lived here then. The first person that we do know lived here was George Aldrich. He was the reverend who set up Cheam School, and he was its first headmaster. Then came the Killick family. The first member of the Killick family was John Killick. He moved in 1741. And from then on, the house was passed from father to son to son. After William Killick, the house passed on to his daughters, Charlotte and Harriet Killick. Do you remember? Harriet Killick was the one who worked as a governess, and they were the ones who took in the lodgers. After them, their sister Penelope moved in, and her daughters Maud and Mary moved in too. Maud and Mary Muller were the last members of the Killick family to live at Whitehall. Now, the only person who lives here is Millie and her friends.
Today, we have put the people that lived at Whitehall in chronological order on our timeline. We've used photographs to see what Whitehall used to be like in the past, and we've looked at the sorts of things that they would have used in the past too.
Thank you so much for spending time with us at Whitehall today. We really hope you've enjoyed it. Now don't forget, Whitehall Historic House in Cheam is open on weekends and school holidays. So why don't you make sure you tell your parents all about us and you can come down to see this amazing house for yourself one day. Thank you. Bye.